stage in TheVentureCity and Refresh. And it's an honor, and I'm super humbled to be on stage with you and to learn from you and to share with everybody. We had coffee right before this, and I already changed my business plan. I called the office, and I was like, we got to do this. You don't understand. This is so important. So I've already learned a bunch from you for the little bit of time, so I'd like to go through sort of how it started, what were those like turning points where you discovered like the right funnels, the right pricing, the right customer acquisition techniques, and where was that moment, like those aha moments that are super important for all of us to understand, and then how does it feel like now after such a great success, such a great exit? So let's get started.
That's a whole lot in one thing there. All right.
We're going to do it.
Thanks for having me. So how do we get started? So I guess just to kind of the start of the whole thing, my brother started eBuilder in 1995, and we kind of came from a construction family. So my grandfather was a contractor, my uncle was a contractor, and we thought, we're going to grow up, maybe go into business together, we're going to get into construction. So he went and got a degree in architecture, I got a degree in engineering, and he got out of architecture and realized unless your name's on the building, you're not going to make any money in architecture. It's tough to make money in architecture. So he went back to school, got a master's in construction management, and so that was in 1994, and so if you think about that period of time, 1993 is when Netscape came out with the browser. So the internet, as we sort of know it today, it really all started around 93. So in 94, he was into computers and stuff, and he decided to write his master's thesis on this crazy thing called the internet and how to use the internet to improve communication and collaboration in the construction process. The construction process is, like we were talking about, is a very challenged process even to this day. It's not very efficient. So he graduates, somebody looks at his master's thesis that was on his thesis committee and said, you should make this into a business. This is a great idea and you're ahead of your time. And so he jokes around that he had nothing to lose, he had no money, no wife, he had a car with no payments, so he's like, okay, I have nothing to lose, I'm gonna go for it. And he started the company then. So fast forward, that was 95, fast forward 3 years later, he had no money, he had never drawn a salary, he was so far ahead in construction of the times, he would go and try to sell this stuff to pretty sophisticated, large construction companies, and he would want to tell them about the software and everything, and they'd start by saying, wait a minute, what's the internet? And who owns the internet? Because contractors are usually pretty skeptical, and who's going to pay for this? What do you mean it's a cloud and it goes in here and all this stuff? So for a number of years, it was very hard to sell. I joined him in 99, and then we had a few turning points.
Yes, I'm going to stop you before you get into sales. I want to hear a little bit more about, because everybody can have great ideas. And I remember I had a co-founder once that said, great ideas are worth exactly $25, right? It's not about the great ideas, it's about solving pain points in the market. And we talked about that a little bit. So can you share a little bit about what were those pain points? What was the struggle in the industry at the time that your brother thought that the internet at the time could solve?
So the construction industry is the second largest industry in the world after healthcare. More than $10 trillion are spent every single year on construction. And there are all kinds of stats out there, but they say as much as 30% of every dollar spent in construction is wasted. So if you ever drive down the street and you see the road crew and you see one guy with a shovel digging and 8 guys standing around smoking a cigarette and somebody writing something on a piece of paper, that sort of epitomizes the lack of efficiency in construction. And construction is unique in that it's sort of like manufacturing, right? Manufacturing, you design and build a product, but it's different in that every single time you build something, it's a one-off. There's no two buildings that are the same. And the teams that come together to build those buildings are unique every single time. It's always a different contractor and a different architect and a different subcontractor and different laborers. So imagine if you built a shoe factory and you built a whole factory, and you're only gonna make one pair of shoes, and then after that you fire everybody, you hire a whole new crew, and you make a new pair of shoes. That's sort of what happens in construction. It's very inefficient. So what we were trying to figure out is how to solve that problem, and a lot of it is about improving communication. It's a simple thing even of getting everybody on the project to be looking at the same set of information, a single source of truth, we call it. So just simple things like that, and it's evolved. It's controlling the money, it's controlling all the communication and the processes for approvals of what happens on jobs is what it evolved to. But the initial idea is, how do we squeeze out some of this inefficiency? And our whole concept is, through this sort of better control and transparency and single source of truth kind of thing, if we can squeeze out 1% to 4%, it's billions and it's trillions of dollars. I mean, it's billions and billions of dollars, right? So 10 trillion a year, 15 trillion, just 1% is $150 billion that you could save every single year. So that's the idea and how it kind of got started.
So then, for those who don't understand eBuilder yet, it's a managing platform where all the subcontractors, the architecture plans, all the materials, all the purchases, all the change orders are all together, and you could see how your budget begins to change over time, and you see what you have left, you see how you've gone over, and you could better manage what everybody's doing. And before, if you had 3 of those projects going on as a construction company, or 150 like you mentioned, it's really difficult to understand where everything is at all times and how that affects your budget.
Yep, and like down here, as an example, the City of Miami Beach, Dade County, Jackson Health, Mount Sinai Hospital, these are Swire that built Brickell City Center. These are they're all clients of ours just in this local area. So if you pass by Jackson Health, they're spending over $1 billion and to build a series of projects. And these very large entities, before a system like eBuilder, they're trying to keep track of everything in Excel. Or they set up a shared drive and try to get all their information in one place. It's very, very basic, even for people and organizations that spend hundreds of millions of dollars, even to this day. So about 70% of our market doesn't use any system at all to do this kind of thing.
So then you had a really tough time, tougher than we have, and there's I'm going to make a lot of parallels in terms of how it was then and how it is now. You had to sell not only an automated system and an integrated, centralized system, but you had to also sell the internet. So we don't have to do that today. Most people know what the internet is, thank God. So then what was that turning point, or what was that aha moment where you realized, for people who have never heard of this, and people who are very manual, and what was that point where you said, this is how they understand it, and this is how we sell it?
Yeah, and you're making a really good point, is that most of the people we sell to, they've been doing it that way their whole life. They don't know that there's a better way. So it's not like, it's difficult to sell a product that somebody doesn't even realize that they need. So there were 2 turning points that got us over the hump to start selling really at scale. The first 10 years, we were working on the product, and we were selling a little bit, and we joke around, we call it the lost decade, because we didn't do a whole lot. We were a small company after 10 years. But the turning points that happened basically at about year 9 was we narrowed our focus significantly. So we went from saying we're going to sell to the construction industry, to contractors, and to anybody that is in construction that has a checkbook. We're going to sell something to you. We narrowed that focus to say, at first, we're going to sell to hospitals that meet a certain criteria. And we narrowed it down to 800 healthcare systems in North America. And we said, at that point, we had 20 or 30 people in our company, and we said, all of us, we're only going to focus on these 800 systems. That was a point of contention in the business, because a lot of people said to themselves, in our company, said, we're going to go broke. There's not enough. That's not enough business. It's not a big enough market. In hindsight, that was one of the smartest things we ever did, is having that really narrow focus, because we became amazingly good at selling to hospitals and understanding what hospitals need and what language they speak, and we could outsell anybody when it came to a hospital construction system. That was the first thing we did. The other turning point was recognizing that we're not going to rely on people coming to us, marketing, inbound kind of what we call inbound marketing now. We're not going to wait for a lead to come in. We're going to go and seek out the people, those 800 entities. We're going to figure out how to get in front of those 800 organizations. And so we moved from an inbound model where we would get leads all the time, and we did back then, you know, a version of what we do today with email and Google and all the ads and stuff. There wasn't as much social media. But we were getting all these leads, and what we found is, you know, 70-80% more than that of the leads, they weren't in our target market. So one day we'd get an architect, and we'd have to learn how to talk that language, and then the next day a contractor, and one day big, one day small. So it's really hard to get good at selling when you have so many different personas that you're trying to work with. So we stopped all of it, and again, this was it was probably like, it's like the last time my brother and I had an argument. It was like 15 years ago about this topic, and he laughs about it now because he was like, we're gonna go broke. This is not gonna work. But doing that, so it's this focused thing, and then just going after these accounts and outbound cold calling. We got one, and then we got another, and then slowly but surely, before you know it, we had 10 healthcare systems. And when we would start talking to these hospitals, and they'd say, well, who are you and why should I talk to you? And we'd say, well, you know, have you heard of HCA? Have you heard of Baptist? Have you heard of so on and so on? They work with us, so at least, you know, you owe it to yourself to hear what they're doing. We're not trying to sell you anything, just listen to what they're doing. And that turned into more and more. And just to carry that through, it took about 10 years, but in 10 years, today, 1 out of every 6 hospitals in the country uses our software. So now we're the market leader in that market. And then what we did is, after a couple of years, we picked another market and another market. Now we have 4 markets that we chase. But that was the turning point for us.
That's amazing. And okay, so we could keep talking about that and make a reference of, for example, in our company, now we have like these robots that are going through LinkedIn and like finding the leads, and we can tell them exactly what we need, and it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Excuse me. Yeah. It was actually implemented by a 17-year-old, and I had no idea what this stuff was. But at that time, how did you find those leads? And so, because if we have that information, maybe that sort of gives us an idea of how to better use these robots or how to better use these technologies that we have if we know how it was done before.
Yeah, so what we did, and it's very simple in concept, it's hard to execute, but very simple. We would call a hospital. It's basically, you know, I used to say to our team, it's like, all you need is a phone and a finger so you could dial the numbers, and that's all we need. We don't need anything else. It's like, because we can get hung up on some of the other, even the tools that we had at the time, but we would call the same number you call if your grandma's in the hospital and you're trying to get to her room. That's where we'd start. And we would come up, over time, we got really good at how to say the right things to get pointed to the person in the healthcare system that did construction. And you only figure this out by doing it over and over and over. You start to figure out what works, and you know, and that's how we did it. The challenge we've had, candidly, is over the years, there's so many tools out there now, and there's so many things you can do that if you don't have that execution kind of engine, it's easy to start hiding behind those tools. So you got to be careful, because at the end of the day, I mean, I'm a big believer that you still need the old-fashioned, somebody needs to talk to somebody, at least in the kind of stuff we sell, which is a high dollar, it's a high dollar sale to a large entity. So there's all the frictionless sales stuff that happens and the high volume stuff, but in our kind of business, it's still somebody talking to somebody else, and you can't get around sort of the old-fashioned way of getting people on the phone and having a conversation.
So speaking of high dollars, can you talk a little bit about how you figured out pricing? Because pricing is one of the most difficult things, especially for SaaS. And so how did you guys experiment with that? How many tries did it take? Like how many back and forths? How many fights, if there were any?
So yeah, no fights on that one. But what I did is, I went to a class on pricing actually in Silicon Valley. I found some class like 20 years ago, and I was like, because I don't know how to do this stuff, so I just went and tried to learn a little bit about it. But basically, what I learned is you want to price on value, right? So the first thing you want to do is figure out how much value are you bringing to the table, and then you look at the competition, and if there's no competition, then you have a lot more flexibility in how you price. If there is competition, you need to be somewhere in the neighborhood of the competition, or you have to have a reason why it's higher or lower. But I drove it all on value, really. What I started to do was we said, okay, we looked at our clients. We said these folks are building $100 million a year, every year in construction. They're saving 2% on average. That's $2 million. What are we charging them? Now, in the beginning, our price point was about $9,000 per year subscription and no services to get it set up. Fast forward now, it's about $125,000 per year subscription on average, and it's $200,000 in services to get it set up. So, and that was just a progression over time of understanding the value, talking to customers and understanding what they valued. Like our customers valued the service to make it work. And so we started to sell that. Like I see a lot of SaaS businesses give services away or sell them at zero margin because they're like, we don't care about the services, we just want to sell the recurring, so do we. Recurring is where it's at, but the services is still, for us, it's a multi-million-dollar high-margin business because that's what customers wanted. So.
And so speaking of the customer, how did you track early on how the customers were interacting with the software and how to use that information? How did you, so right now we have like Google Tags and Facebook Pixel and all this stuff that can funnel all that data into a single console and you could see what's going on and where the friction is, but back then that wasn't available. So how were you able to track that?
Yeah, we didn't have those tools. We had at one point in time we had just Google Analytics, and we put Google Analytics on our site, and we would try to look at how much traffic we had and where people were spending their time on the site. And we built some very basic stuff, like very basic. How many logins did we get? And we would just try to look at were people logging in. And were they using the software the way, let me back up for 1 second. What we did with every customer in the beginning, after we sold a deal, we said, what does success look like to you? Let's write down 3 things that you're going to say. If those 3 things happen, you're going to say, yes, this was a successful implementation, and I like this software. We'd write that down, we'd show it to them, we'd make them sign it. And then we'd figure out a way to measure that. So if they said, we want to have all our documents, we want everybody on the project to stop using paper documents and access this system. We'd figure out a way to just go back and measure that and compare it against the kind of the critical success factors that we lined up.
And the services that you guys implemented, did that also help you track the way users were using the software? So was that like a double, would you get double data from that?
Yeah, we would. So the services, we have about 125 consultants around the country that do implementations. So they're the ones doing the services work. And they don't finish, we don't call their implementation finished until they're required to measure the adoption against those critical success metrics, and they need to come to us and say, here's what the customer asked for, here's what they're getting with metrics. Unless and then, we check the box. Otherwise, they have to keep working with that customer. And we've even, in some cases, implemented twice just to get it right. Because at the end of the day, we want the recurring. And if we get it right, our first customer is still a customer. So, we've gotten a recurring revenue stream for 24 years from one organization. That's what you want.
Definitely. And so before we get into a little bit later years and scaling, how was the company culture early on? So you mentioned getting into an argument with your brother. When it was like 20 of you, 10 of you, how did you make decisions on talent versus culture, or talent versus certain principles? How did you begin to build a set of principles for scaling a team?
Well, let me say this about my brother. So my brother and I have different roles. So we generally got along really great because we have a great amount of trust for each other. So it was easy. We did have a partner, a third partner early on, and there was more, arguing, if you will, back and forth because we were all getting in each other's stuff and trying to find our way of what is your role versus your role versus your role. That was really early on. But in terms of building the initial culture and figuring out how to hire the right people, we just made a lot of mistakes, honestly. We were talking at dinner last night, and I said, how'd you guys figure this out so quick? Because it sure as hell it took us a long time to figure out how important it was to hire the right people, and how important culture was, and attitude, and it's like the old adage, you hire for skill, you fire for attitude. And early on, we just made every single mistake. It's so obvious to me now, but we did. That's what we did. That's how we learned the hard way.
So when was that point where you realized, oh my God, we're scaling? This is unstoppable.
So as I mentioned, the first 10 years. So we go through about 10 years, and we're $2 million in revenue, and we figured this sales thing out. We're focused on these markets. We start to fire on all cylinders. And for many, many, many years, I'm like, my goal in life is to get to be $10 million in revenue. If we can get 10 million, it seemed at one point in time so far away to even think that was possible. And when we finally hit that number, is when I really realized, okay, we're starting to scale now. And I think, at least for us, at about 10 million, sort of the wheels start to fall off a little bit if you are running the business the same way as you did when it was 2 million or 5 million. And a little bit before then, I joined a business group called Vistage. It's like EO or YPO or some of these others. And I started to get a lot of feedback and coaching at that time. And one of the things we learned is the people that, whatever that saying is, but the people that got you here aren't necessarily the people that are going to get you to the next step. And what you find is that there's these turning points, 10 million, 25 million, I think 100 million, and I think, another level is probably 250, where the same people that were awesome at executing and building your business at that $10 million level, they're not the right people anymore at 25 million. And the hardest thing, it's still the hardest thing, in my opinion, to do, is to make the changes in those people, because they're the same people who, you have all this loyalty towards. Somebody that helped me, for example, recently he retired now, but our original CTO, he's the first employee we ever hired. But we got to a point around 25 million where it wasn't his strength anymore, and he started to become a detriment really to the growth of the business. So it's how you carefully and respectfully move people out of roles and maybe into different roles and bring the right people in so you can keep growing the company. That's when we figured that out. That's really how we got up to these next levels. And I've seen a lot of people get stuck if you don't do it.
And you mentioned something while we were having coffee that really struck me, and is something that I have a lot of trouble with, that at some point you stopped focusing on the product and you focus only on sales. And I seem to be like super focused on the product and scaling the product, and maybe I'm just hiding from having to get out there and sell the product. And so how did you guys make that decision and that pivot to say, okay, the product's good enough, let's focus on scaling this thing?
Well, you know, being an engineer, I was thinking about the product, and I was, you know, in the beginning, like, well, is the product good enough? Maybe I was trying to figure out why we're not growing, and I was like, okay, the product, you know, we need this feature, and we lost here, and I was trying to be all analytical about it. And I remember I vividly remember this because I had just joined this business group and still getting to know people. And a guy in that group said to me, you know, every month you come here and you complain and it's the product and you're trying to figure all this out. And he said a bunch of curse words and he said, just stop with that crap already. He's like, you have a good product. People buy the product. You know, you have revenue, right? I said, yes. He goes, good. Well, your product's good enough. He's like, you got to focus on sales. He like read me the riot act, and I wanted to cry in that moment. But I kind of reflected on it, and I'm like, okay, he's right. And I didn't want to do that because I was like, I'm not a sales guy. I'm an engineer. That's not what I do. You know, that's somebody else's job. And it was that moment that I was like, I need to do this. And my brother and I, at that point in time, we dedicated 100% of our time to sales and marketing. And that's really when we started to take off. Other people took care of other parts of the business. We were singularly focused on that. And we went from the two of us selling to you know, slowly building a team, hiring leaders, bringing in other leaders, and kind of growing it from there. That's how it started to scale.
Awesome. And tell me a little bit about the moments nearing the exit. So what was that like, and then how did that feel like to have an offer? Did you have offers before? How was that relationship?
Okay, so probably for like 15 years, people were calling on us. So we were bootstrapped. We had one investor in 2000. So we really were like a clean company. You know, a lot of companies that grow to our scale, they're on a Series G or H. You know, there's a lot of investors in the mix at that point in time. So we had one investor. They were strategic, and we were just kind of on our own doing our thing. And so people would call and say, we want to be an investor, and so on. And what I did at a point in time, I knew at some point, being a tech company, this isn't like a family business kind of thing or a lifestyle business. It's like we need to sell. I felt like at some point, I wasn't ready to do it when we did it, but I just felt at some point this isn't something we're gonna, you know, our kids aren't gonna be working in this company in some point. So I knew that I needed to do something, so I started to take the calls from the investors that would call, and I actually invested a lot of time with these private equity guys. It was mostly growth equity people that were talking to us. And I would start by telling them, we're not selling, we don't need money, and we were making a lot of money, we didn't need any investment. So I'd start by saying, we don't need you, but we'll have a conversation, hear what you have to say. And slowly but surely got to know you get to know the first level, like the analysts that are right out of school that are cold calling us, but we got to the point where we were talking to all the principals of these very large private equity firms. So I did this for like 5 years, and I just did it as part of my job. It became part of my job. I would use it to learn about the market. So I'd ask, I made a point anytime I did one of these 30-minute calls, 15 minutes is them telling me stuff. And you know, I'm not just gonna be spilling information, I wanna hear stuff from them. So I learned a lot about the market. I learned what things were selling for, what was going on in our space, and so on. And we got to a point where around, you know, in 2017, where we said, okay, we're growing 25% a year. This is starting to become, it's getting bigger and bigger. We're on our own. We had bought out our partner at the time, so it was just my brother and I owned the business. And we started to feel like, gee, it'd be nice if we had an investor to just to be there just to not feel alone. We'll take some money off the table, which would be good, but growing to that $100-200 million level, we'll have somebody to work with. And so we started to entertain in a more serious way with all these folks, and we still said we're going to run a process. We're not going to do this, we're not talking to you guys until we run an actual process. So the long story short is we built up to this knowing that a day was going to come that we're going to sell part of the company. That was our plan. And then, and so by the time we ran a process, which is in 2017, we had everybody already knew who we were, and everybody knew how much we've grown, and they kind of knew me already. I had guys that I've been talking to for 5 years, and when they knew my numbers, because every time they'd call, they'd say, well, what are you going to do this year in revenue? And then lo and behold, we did that in revenue. So they realized we're good executors, good operators. So we had tremendous interest in the business when we finally said we're going to sell part of our company. And it was a weird feeling because you start to have all these emotions of giving up something that you've created, and if somebody's going to screw it up, or losing control, all those kinds of things. But I felt at that point in time, I had like 4 or 5 people that I was like, I could be that guy's partner. I could be okay if they owned half of our company. So I was feeling more comfortable with it. And then the Trimble thing was a surprise, kind of. The Trimble just said, they came along and they're like, we can't buy part of your company. We can only buy all of your company, but here's what we're thinking about. Here's what we want to do. Here's our vision. It was lined up with what we wanted to do. And then the CEO, this was really the main thing, was the CEO just hit it off. I hit it off with him, and he made me feel like nothing was going to change, that I was just going to kind of keep doing my thing. I'm just not going to own the company anymore. And 18 months later, that's turned out to be the case. So
you still have the same role, and you go to work every day even after this exit, and you're still running the company. Now you say you were running 4 other companies within the
so I work harder than I ever did. I'm working harder now than I ever did. But I'm enjoying it. My brother and I both we're like, the day it's not fun anymore, we're gonna stop doing it. But they've been true to their word. They haven't kind of gotten into our stuff, other than it's a public company, so the financial reporting is at a whole nother level. But other than that, I mean, we do our own thing. And then in addition to that, and this was a big selling point for me, in the sales process, before we agreed to sell to them, I knew that they had some competing businesses to eBuilder. And I asked the CEO, who's gonna run those businesses, or are we gonna report into that, whoever's running those businesses? And he said, well, I was actually gonna ask you to run them. So he gave us 3 other businesses to run, and now we run 4 businesses. So.
That's awesome. So before we open it up for questions, I wanna talk a little bit about the future of construction and the future of eBuilder, and especially now seeing how robots are popping up everywhere, and eventually, I mean, in my vision, you're going to press a button and the robot's going to build the building, and you're going to have these cities with robots building buildings all the time, and there'll be a smart system, which hopefully I'll be a part of, where it understands what needs to be built and so on. So how do you imagine eBuilder sort of processing that data that would come in automatically and understand and sort of give feedback in the future? Like, are you guys thinking in that direction?
Well, we have today $300 billion with a B of active construction that runs through our system. So we have like very, very granular data on every contractor and how much the change orders were and how much the original bid was or how much the estimate was when it was revised. I mean, there's all kinds of valuable information. We probably know more than anybody out there how much it costs to build a hospital, as an example. We haven't done anything with that data, so that is a future opportunity for us. It's a little tricky in our world because the data, there's the privacy issue with our clients. Some of them are very private and they don't want to share the data even on an anonymous basis. But that's one thing, big opportunity. And the other thing is now being part of Trimble. So the construction industry has these big facility owners at one end, then they hire contractors, they hire architects, the architects hire a lot of times the engineers, the contractors hire the subcontractors go out and they have the equipment and the labor, they are dealing with the product manufacturers for all the products that go into making the buildings. So it's all of these various different entities, and it works in a very disjointed way. And there is an opportunity, especially now with Trimble, because Trimble serves every one of those groups that I just mentioned. There's no reason, for example, that information that's captured in a piece of equipment, which happens today, why should that information is electronically being captured in a piece of equipment, and then it is transferred in writing. Somebody writes it down and hands a piece of paper to the next person. They go and key it into another system, print it out, hand it to the next company. They key it into their system, print it out, hand it to the owner. They key it in, print it out, and have the data. It's ridiculous how this stuff works, and it's so inefficient. So to me, the future is connecting all this stuff together, and it's going to drive out a ton of inefficiency. And then robots is also something that's coming. When it comes to laying block or brick and doing various components, there's a lot happening now on prefabrication of systems that are being built in factories and then being shipped out to job sites. So there's a lot of opportunity. And like I said, even if 30% is the high number people say of waste, but even if we can take 10% of the waste out of the construction process in the United States, it would pay for the entire infrastructure problem every year. It would pay for it. $1 trillion a year be paid for. And you know what's been going on, for years, the government, and it's a bipartisan thing, everybody realizes that our infrastructure needs work, and we can't fund it. So.
Awesome. Okay, on that note, let's open it up for Q&A. And thank you.
Yeah. So I was working, I had a good job, I was like happy, go lucky, minding my own business, but I was, John and I would talk, he would ask me stuff, and so we were kind of always talking, but the turning point was, he's 3 years into business, he's never drawn a paycheck, and he hired someone, a consultant, to come and help give him some advice and try to help grow the company. And the consultant was getting a pretty good salary. And so, which is like kind of a red flag. I mean, he literally was, my mother and myself were giving him money to pay for his rent and stuff, And here is some consultant making a lot of money, so it was a red flag. And then the consultant wanted John to go out and raise some money. And he's like, you need to go to your family, and you need to raise whatever, $200,000 or $300,000. And so John came to me and to my parents and said, okay, I need to get some money. That's what the guy said I need to do. And okay, so we start asking him questions. I said, okay, let's see, what's the plan? What's some financials? Where are you at? And so he went back and asked for that information, and the consultant was like, they just need to give it to you because you're family, So that was another red flag, right? So, and so I started scratching my head. I was like, John, this doesn't sound right, and is there something wrong here? So we talked about it, and I said, you have a great opportunity. So I started digging into the whole company. I'm like, this is something, maybe I could do this with you, and we'll put some money in, but we'll do it different. And the way this consultant wanted to go was, this is 1998. And it was the internet boom was just going crazy. So there were companies getting valued at $100 million that had no customers and all this kind of stuff. So this consultant, his strategy was, it wasn't a bad strategy, but he just wanted to make the company appear to be something that it wasn't yet and go out and raise a whole bunch of money. So that was his plan. we didn't do that, so we obviously didn't go that route. What we tried to do is just build a regular old business. You know, you have customers, they pay money, the money that comes in is more than the money that goes out, you have profit, and that's it. And at the time, people were like, you guys are idiots. And then 2000 came, and the whole internet .com turned into the .bomb, and had he gone that route of trying to really blow up the company, it would have blown up at that time. It would have failed, like many other companies did. So that's kind of that's how the whole thing came around. And just the funny thing is when I looked at it, I was like, yeah, I'll do this for like 3 years. And it'll be fun, you know, and we'll put these things in place, and we'll flip the company, and we'll be done. And, you know, 21 years later, here I am.
So I have a similar situation to what you mentioned about you get to a point where you have a product that works, but now you got to decide you got to sell it.
Yep.
And we had kind of a similar strategy where we try to identify a certain segment of the market and just kind of go after it. But it was about 400 companies that we were could potentially target. Mm-hmm. And we're just really afraid that we would burn bridges. Like you said, like you kind of learned by trial and error, and you was like, oh, next time you learn something. And we thought, well, every time we talk to somebody and we screw up, that's a customer we don't see for who knows how long.
Yep.
So.
Do you have any customers in this segment yet, or are you at the point where you're trying to get the first customers?
I think we have about 5 accounts right now, but they're kind of small. It's pretty weak.
Okay, so the distinction is that when we were going after healthcare, when we made that decision, we had a product that we felt good about enough, like the healthcare. We had a couple of healthcare clients. We had, and that was by luck. We didn't think about that. Like, we just happened to get a healthcare client. The person was a visionary. He told us, this is what I need. We built it for him. So we learned with that customer. Where we made the mistakes was in the sales process, meaning we said the wrong stuff on the phone.
Right.
And you can get around that. You can recover from that. Because you could always, you can't recover if your product is has some fatal flaw in it. If you built a product for the healthcare market and you get somebody to buy it and it doesn't do what you're saying and it doesn't give them value, that's harder to recover, maybe impossible to recover from. But if you have a good product and a sales guy is pounding the phones and says the wrong thing, you just, throw them under the bus the next time you have a conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess in the early stages, you mentioned that you were not really a salesperson. You're more of an engineer. So how did you do your first sales? Was it you? Did you hire a salesperson? And what was your strategy at that point?
So the original sales, when we would have leads coming in, my brother or myself would take the leads. When we started to say, okay, how are we going to go outbound and how are we going to get people on the phone? We hired a couple of people to do the outbound calling. And then what we would my brother and I would sit 10 feet away from these two people, and we'd literally, it's micromanagement, which is what you kind of have to do with the outbound calling stuff, but we'd listen to the conversations before all the fancy tools. We'd just hear one side of the conversation, and we'd sit there with, instant messaging and say this, say that. They're saying that, do that. Literally. And that's kind of how we did it at first. And then what would happen is those two guys would get us appointments, and then my brother and I would go out on the appointments in the beginning. We evolved from there to, and where the engineering, where I got comfortable with sales is when I realized the sales process and sales management is engineering. It's really an engineering process. So I was like, okay, we need this many of these to get to this stage, to get to that stage. So we built a sales process. We put KPIs and metrics in place. That was very comfortable for me to do. And then hiring, just getting, we got good at hiring the right people and stuff. That's still an art, a little bit of an art with hiring salespeople, but that's kind of how we evolved into it. Oh, and just one point, that I think you were asking there. I think some people try to stay completely out of the sales process. You know, they'll say, like, I have a friend of mine who has a technology company, and he's like, sales not my gig, and I hired a sales VP. I hired a sales manager. I hired the next best thing from sliced bread salesperson, you know? And that's okay, but the sort of the hands-off approach where people that say, you know, that's not my thing, I'm just gonna keep focusing on this, is I don't think a good idea until you get the scale going, because salespeople, they're either selling the customer or they're selling you, and their boss. You know, you have to really understand what's going on, and if you take a hands-off approach, you could waste a lot of time before you really figure things out. That's my own opinion. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the problems that you had when you would start scaling the company at the early beginnings, and how do you solve those problems?
Sure. So, you know, we had cash problems because we were bootstrapped. So that's probably the first set of problems, big problems that we dealt with. Early on, you know, going back to the days, like we had, in 1998, we had 180,000 per year in recurring revenue. That was our recurring revenue. And it didn't cover our expenses. So we did some services, we did some other work that we could get just to kind of bring in money so we could pay for stuff. But cash flow was a huge problem. And in hindsight, if I had it to do all over again, I would have taken some money, because I spent a lot of time just trying to make sure I had enough money to make payroll every other week. So that was a big challenge. But the minute we got over that hump, which was in the early 2000s, we started to generate enough cash to pay, you know, for our expenses. Then the next challenge that we had was hiring, and you try to figure out, you know, you only have X amount of dollars to spend. Do you hire another engineer? Do you hire a marketing person? Do you hire a salesperson? And then you have this feeling too that at least I always had this feeling where like, oh, we're this little company, we don't have any money. Why is, you know, somebody good going to come work for us when they can go down the street and work for that big company over there? So you struggle to figure out how to get good people, and frankly, you can't get really good people. You know, the kind of people that I have now that run my sales organization, they never would have come to our company when we were a startup, not for any amount of money. So that was a struggle, and figuring out how you can find those gems, you know, the right people, because that's what's going to make your company, how to find them, and how to do this when you have very little money and you're still trying to make everything go. Those were probably the big struggles early on. The flip of that is, the minute we'd hire somebody good, it's the best feeling in the world. It's like making a big sale, because all of a sudden they're doing things, they're helping you grow, they're taking things off your plate, and then you know you feel really good about that.
Sorry, one more question. How do you decide what to hire first, like sales, marketing, an engineer?
When I went to my business group and I got that, you know, my friend Chris kind of gave me a good talking to, and when I left that, I was like, I'm just hiring salespeople from this point forward, and I started by hiring BDRs, you know, business development reps is what they call them now. We didn't call them that then. I went from there hiring salespeople, and then what I did is I just started to backfill every other position, because they started to bring in money. Money started coming in, and then I would hire everything else. And people would fight for whether we hire another engineer or another marketing person or another services or support person. But I let sales be first, and I let everything else get driven from there.
A question on this one, as some entrepreneurs fall onto this problem. Why this idea that you did? What made you double down on this idea when it started out? Like, there's so many things going on. why this one particular idea with your brother?
I mean, the real answer is because we were dumb. We were naive. I mean, seriously, like when I look back, in 2001 about, the dot bomb happened. If you had an E in your name, if you had a .com in your name, you would get hung up on. We couldn't sell anybody. I mean, it didn't matter what you were selling. It didn't matter if it was free. And so I kind of scratched my head, you know, and my brother and I are like, what the hell are we doing here? You know, we both could have other careers, successful, and do other things. And we just, I don't know, we were stubborn, or we were dumb. I mean, honestly, we were naive. Like if I really look back at it, it makes no sense to keep doing it. Really doesn't, you know. But I mean, I'm being honest. Like we just did, and then we had, you know, we had our little wins here and there, and it was like that was a tough period of time. It was like about 2 years, where all of a sudden we're like, wow, you know, our customers didn't leave us. We have this recurring revenue coming in, and a few other people are buying. You know, hey, this is pretty good. And nowadays recurring revenue is sort of like, everybody wants to have a recurring revenue model. Back then, that wasn't the case, but I did see that you could see the benefit in. I mean, because even in those really hard times, we had a couple $1 million coming in that we could count on. So great question. So about 97% of our customers renew, okay? And that's so we have like a 3% churn rate, but we have something called a net retention rate also that we look at, which is if you take the customers on January 1st, and then you look through the year and you say, subtract all the ones you lost, but add any upsells to that initial cohort of customers, that's called net retention, and our net retention is 110%. So that means that, you know, if we sold nothing at all, our recurring revenue would be 10% higher at the end of the year than it is at the beginning of the year. And that's pretty, like, best in class. So, and the reason is because it's pretty sticky software once it's in there and we do all that critical success stuff and everything. But the reason people don't renew or that we lose customers is it never gets adopted correctly is one reason, no matter how hard we try. And that is a symptom of it's usually a leadership issue. Because what we're doing is change management. We're going into a hospital and we're telling them a new way to build buildings. It takes somebody senior in that organization to tell all their people, to tell their vendors, this is how we're going to do things going forward. When we have clients that aren't willing to do that, the system doesn't get as much value, and we sometimes lose the customer. And also, sometimes people either get bought or go out of business, but that doesn't happen very often.
Hi, Ron. What's your stance on building information modeling? Do you think it's going to become the standard? If it is, how's eBuilder going to come into play then? And if it isn't, why do you think it's not going to become the standard?
Yeah, so building information modeling is for the last at least 10, 15 years, maybe more, has become very popular. And it's the very simple concept of it for everybody's benefit is like it's sort of the 3D rendering of these buildings. Even today in our industry, we build three-dimensional structures, but we build them from two-dimensional drawings. So it kind of makes no sense really to do it that way. And we've started now with building information modeling, or BIM, to design in 3 dimensions. And so that has taken off, and we're seeing more use of that. But my opinion on it is there's a whole nother level of where we're going with BIM, which is right now these models, you see a pretty cool, you can see these walkthroughs and 3D things on a computer screen, but it's not designed to the level that you could actually build something from. It's not the actual pieces of rebar or the screws, the bolts, and so on. So there's a concept that we talk a lot about in our company and as part of Trimble called constructible models. So the next phase for this stuff is designing these buildings in such detail that it's literally all the pieces and parts are built in a computer model. And once you do that, you eliminate a lot of the errors and a lot of the problems in the actual construction process. That in itself is going to take a lot of waste out of the process. Where eBuilder fits into that is we are the platform for the communication and collaboration of that process. So we're kind of an integral part of that whole BIM constructible process that I think is probably 10 or 20 years away, but it's coming.
What is the length of the process, for instance, when you start, you do the cold calling with the potential customer to the time that you go where you actually input the system and you have them up where they can handle it on their...
So, great question. So we call what we call the customer journey, and the customer journey begins when the first contact is ever made by anyone in our company with someone in the organization we're trying to target. That customer journey can be as much as 5 years. Okay, don't panic yet. And that is done by an inside salesperson. They would get you on the phone. They would pitch you that first time. And many times, almost in all cases, that it just drops right off. You say, oh, this is pretty cool, but I'm not interested right now. We then put you in our marketing and our nurture tracks, and we stay top of mind with you. What we have found after doing it for a bunch of years is you're going to come in 2 other times. The third, on average, is 2.5 times on average. That last time that you come in, from the moment we engage you until you're a customer is about 12 months. So, and our whole goal, for our problem that we're trying to solve is we can't wait 5 years. So we're trying to get to that third time faster. We're trying to figure out how to do that. But once we're in, it's about a 12-month sales cycle, which is long in as far as sales cycles go, but it's typical for a $300,000 plus sale.
So there seems to be a recent trend of South Florida companies being bought out, and then the new company asking the CEO to take over existing divisions, like you're taking over 4 divisions, Trimble, and Chewy's basically taken over all the e-commerce of the acquiring company. So what is it that these acquiring companies see in South Florida companies, and what advantages did you have of basically growing up in South Florida and building in South Florida?
Well, I think we're scrappy a little bit. We're entrepreneurial, and we're just trying to figure out how to make it happen. We are aggressive in a good way, and I think what at least Trimble saw in us is they look at our numbers and they're like, okay, they're growing, they're making money, they're not coming to the table saying we need all this big budget or we need you to do all these other things in order for us to grow. They're doing better than some of our other divisions are with the big brand and with the name recognition and all that other stuff. So it's looking at that and saying, these are entrepreneurs that are just gonna make it happen by hook or by crook. And I think the big companies, and I'm seeing it firsthand. It's and I love working as part of Trimble, but it's a different mentality and a different culture. If you're somebody that's running, a big division, 1,000 people, 2,000 people, and you've worked in corporate America your whole life, it's a different. Those folks and the CEO of Trimble, he tells his staff, including me, this. He says, these guys never had to make a payroll. They never had to worry about not being able to pay somebody. I had to do that. It changes your mentality about making sure you hit a number or hitting a goal. So I think it's stuff like that the big companies like and appreciate.
Similar to Olivia being an early stage prop tech company, what advice would you have, let's say, wished you would have received and or could provide to someone growing and scaling that you would like to hear that maybe might help out? Like, what would you have wished you would have heard back in the day that have been like, thank you?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think some of it, like that we've talked about, the advice of picking a niche that you can really own, even if it's the tiniest niche, but pick a niche that you can really own, because it makes your life so much easier the minute you get a few customers in that niche, and you actually could start to get momentum. So, and that, it was 10 years before we realized that. And then the whole sales thing, you know, it's like, don't be afraid of it. You know, I mean, if anybody was afraid of it, it was me. And I wish I would have, had I figured out some of that stuff, I mean, I could have maybe knocked a decade off of our whole process, you know. So those would be the two main things.
Hi. Out of the 4 industries that you're focused on, which one represents the most opportunity or growth, and where does higher education fit in those 4?
Okay. Yeah, so we focus on, eBuilder sells into the healthcare industry, higher education, or education in general, government, and commercial development, which are like large corporations or real estate developers. Out of all of those, I would say government is probably at the top, and higher education is number 2. The reason government's at the top is there's tons of inefficiency in the government process, and especially now, government has like complications in terms of how they fund their projects, and I don't know how you could ever do some of the things they have to do, what they have to keep track of, and how they have to manage these things without software. So it really is a great fit for what we do. Higher ed is up there though, and if you look at universities around the country, it's bad if you have to pay tuition, but it's good for our business. But the way they differentiate is they build cool buildings. You know, that's all these, Harvard and University of Chicago and Duke and all these other big universities. It's like the way they want to stand out is by building really, really standout facilities, not only for their students, but for the faculty. That's how they attract great faculty as well, and researchers and stuff. So that translates into tons of construction, and it's still going on.
You mentioned that you do pricing on value, you know, mostly, you know, and how do you measure that so that you can, you know, one, incorporate in your message, and also how do you translate that into numbers somehow, you know, how much you can, you know, charge your customer?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we tried for many years to, first we said we can never sell value because we can't prove value. So we convinced ourselves that, you know, it's impossible for us to try to sell value because we expected that people were going to ask us to prove it, and then we'd say we can't, and then they'd, you know, throw us out. So that was a myth for us, because, you know, so we believed that for a while. Then we said, well, let's go figure out how to actually measure this stuff. We were not successful. Because rarely is value of software, I mean, it's always a combination of things, right? It's not, I'd love to say our software saved $1 gazillion, but it's the people, it's the leadership, it's the practices that they use, right? So the way we figured out how to do this is we turned it around, and we started by asking our customers who weren't threatened by us, who didn't feel like we're trying to sell them something. We would ask them, you know, how do you justify this? I mean, innocently, you know, why are you paying us? Like what? And they'd say, oh, well, let me explain to you why we do that. I mean, it's crazy, but, you know, people tell you, and they'd say, well, you know, ever since we bought your software, we eliminated blah, blah, blah. I'm saving $200,000 a year. I have 3 people I didn't need to hire based on your software. And we said, well, how did you do that? So that's how we started to get that data. And then when we went to prospects, rather than say to them, you know, we could save you money, we'd say, you know, some of our customers have been able to save 2-3%. I mean, so instead of talking about what we can do, we would talk about the stories that our customers told, which is a lot less threatening. Because when a sales guy says they're going to save you money, that really means, give me your wallet, you know? Right? So so people don't buy into that anyway. But when you say, look, this customer over here saved money, here's how they did it. I don't know if that's applicable for you, and try to get them to talk about it. Yeah, that's what we do.
Ask the right question, as you said, you know. And,
yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Did you hire software developers, or did you outsource them?
For many years, as we grew the company, we hired our own development team, and we built our own development teams. We did everything in-house, and we felt that was more important in order to get everybody to gel and really understand the requirements of, get passionate about what it was we were building. So that's how we did it. And then as we've grown, and especially now being part of Trimble, we have more resources. Like we have a big facility in Chennai, and we have lots of engineers there, both our own engineers and outsourced. So we've now converted to where we still have a huge development team, but we do some outsourcing nowadays.
Ron, thank you. I'm new to Miami. I actually moved here just over 4 months ago. My question for you, what do you see possible for the Miami ecosystem to really build world-changing companies?
I mean, I think nowadays, and that's a great question, I think nowadays there's a lot of opportunity and possibility for us. I think when I think back to 20 years ago, it was hard to find peers that you could talk to and other people that were trying to grow companies, or even at the scale level, there's very few companies. I think now, first of all, there's a much bigger ecosystem, which is awesome. So there's a lot more people here. That's also attracting more people. Like we're having more success today, and for the last 10 years, hiring people from outside of the state to come into our neck of the woods, and then once they're here, even if they leave our company, they feel like they have other companies that they can go to. And as we build that talent, it strengthens the ecosystem, and I think there's a lot more possible. I still think we can do more. We have to invest more here. Like more investment needs to come into our area, and I think that a lot of the traditional VCs and growth equity folks were, at one point in time, they only wanted to invest in the markets we all know, in Silicon Valley and New York and Austin and Boston and all that. And now I think they see strength in these off markets, if you will, like a market like this where, in Silicon Valley, people jump around from job to job and the next cool thing every other day. And for an investor, that's not as exciting as coming into a market like this. So I do think we need more investment, but I think that's happening and coming. So there's a lot of potential. I'm excited about it. I think it's great.
All right, one last round of applause for Olivia and Ron.